Fullmetal Alchemist is one of the most beloved anime of all time. Sitting at the top of anime ratings for over a decade, its story is one of the most immersive, well-put-together tales about two brothers who desperately try to resurrect their mother, only to be punished by the laws of nature. I've brought you a series making sense of some of the most confusing anime. Now I'll narrate the tale of Edward and Alphonse, highlighting the inner motivations of these characters you love in this recap-esque summary. This is the story of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Everything began in the kingdom of Xerxes. There, a practitioner of alchemy studied rather taboo concepts within the ancient science. He wished to bring the metaphysical being of the gate, one which we could call God, all-knowing and all-powerful, to the physical world. The exact process he undertook we do not know, but what is clear is the alchemist successfully brought a mere piece of the god to the physical world, grounding it with the blood of his 23rd house slave. This piece of god was given the name Dwarf in the Flask. Slave 23 began speaking to the dwarf when spotting him during his routine cleaning of the lab. As a token of thanks for giving him the blood that gave him life, the dwarf shared with the slave knowledge that would allow him to climb through the social hierarchy. He taught the slave alchemy and basic education. He even gave the slave a proper name, Van Hohenheim. Hohenheim quickly became an apprentice of the house alchemist, who took note of his talent, and as time marched on, Van and the dwarf spent less time talking with each other. Seeing the slave continue to grow and evolve left the dwarf with much to be desired. He progressively became more lonely. This emotion quickly turned into disdain for humans. He felt ostracized as the only one of his kind, and trapped in a bottle at that. His time reflecting led him to a rocky conclusion. If there was truly no other being like him, then he will throw away these feelings of being wanted and replace them with a lust for knowledge. If being ensnared in this flask is what life has in store for him, he might as well surpass life altogether, become a higher being than the humans that created him. If he wished to walk outside the flask, he must create a container of sorts, a body to protect his essence, and why not an immortal one at that? Of course, with the vast knowledge of a god, he knows how, but due to the laws of equivalent exchange, the principle at the core of alchemy, the process demands a sacrifice equal to the result. Tricking someone into sacrificing so much could prove difficult, or so he thought. The king of Xerxes is more interested in his personal continued prosperity over his kingdom, and so he summons the dwarf in the flask to his temple and tells it no matter what must be sacrificed, he desires immortality. The dwarf smiles, how easy humans are to understand. The dwarf knows true immortality is not an attainable state in alchemy, but what is the continuation of a life at the sacrifice of another. For each sacrificed life, the parties involved in the transmutation will receive the being's lifespan, and so the dwarf tells the king to draw a transmutation circle around the kingdom of Xerxes. With a population of roughly 1 million people, this should be enough. The king does as commanded, and the circle is drawn. The dwarf tells the king to stand at the central point to receive the gifts of the labor, while he, along with his caretaker Hohenheim, will stand elsewhere. As the ritual commences, the town around Xerxes erupts in destruction. Blood fills the array around the kingdom at 5 specific points, which is when the dwarf's deceit is exposed. The array of the transmutation circle does not fashion around the king and his cabinet, but around the dwarf and his caretaker. The entire population of Xerxes drops to the ground, their souls leaving their bodies, sacrificed. And the dwarf, along with Van, are given bodies that will survive the passage of time. Bodies that house roughly 500,000 souls each, giving them 500,000 lifetimes to live. These two have become walking philosopher's stones. Van was not told of the dwarf's plan, nor aware that he would be given such a body. Yet here he is, a semi-immortal entity, and across from him, the dwarf who now resembles himself. It disgusted him. Within his body, he could hear the cries of thousands of souls, pleading to be heard, each scared and confused at what has become of them. He had no words for the dwarf, and the two parted ways, each choosing to walk a path different from each other. Van Hohenheim would wander east, while the dwarf would walk west. Each would arrive in 2 very different kingdoms. The dwarf would arrive to ancient Amestris, teaching the people here the basics of alchemy, though mischievously inventing a way to control this populace's ability to perform the art. The dwarf would teach them a form that relies on the earth below for strength and transmutations, but he would create a thin layer beneath the surface of power derived from his philosopher's stone, allowing him to nullify their abilities or let them pass through as he pleases. This allowed the dwarf total control over Amestris alchemy, meaning the militaristic government cannot use the power he taught to dethrone him. The people of Amestris would come to know him as the philosopher of the East, due to his arrival from the Eastern lands and the knowledge and alchemy he brought them. He would later disappear from the public eye, retreating beneath the surface where he would construct tubing that delivered his stone's thin membrane across the expanding kingdom, allowing him to cut off the flow of alchemy whenever and wherever he desired. But this was just the beginning of his path to godhood. In the Eastern lands, Hohenheim walked a different path than that of the dwarf. He struggled to come to terms with the lost souls within him, and on his long journey through the deserts separating Xerxes and the land of Zing, he attempted to communicate with the souls within, listening to their names, their stories, their hopes. He attempted to bring peace to these souls, unlike the dwarf who silenced their screams for help. By the time he arrived at Zing, he had better come to terms with his reality. Here he taught the kingdom of alchemy, blending these teachings with their own metaphysical healing practices to create alchemy. This tree of alchemy involved channeling the world's chi, treating the earth like a living being, finding the energy used as sacrifice for the refiguration of mass within the air, the water, the earth. Van's teachings to the people of Zing would earn him the name, the philosopher of the West. Time goes by. The dwarf coins a new name for himself, Father, after denouncing the 7 sins that plague man: pride, lust, greed, envy, sloth, gluttony, wrath. Each of these sins are given their own bodies. A philosopher's stone holding the desire is given to beings that hold within them a strong aptitude for the specific deadly sin. These beings of great power bow to Father as if they were of his kin, which in a sense they are. They vow to assist him in his goals, these beings given the name homunculi. Father believes by giving up the desires that make him human, he can become a higher being and surpass God himself. Yet even without these sins, his godhood will not be reached so easily. Believing that a more immortal body will allow him to consume the universal knowledge that people give this title to, Father begins a plan that will span centuries in which his puppet government will expand its rule by attacking neighboring states, creating an even grander country that will become a nationwide transmutation array. The country is sacrificed for more power, a grander philosopher's stone. Father plans to consume the souls of millions for the sake of becoming more powerful than any celestial being. Hohenheim cannot allow that. Before Hohenheim's pilgrimage to the western land of Amestris, Father's plans for what would become known as the Promised Day have already been set into motion. One of the major steps is to ensure the 5 points within the transmutation circle are spilled with blood and carnage. And so, one of these points' Day of Reckoning has been chosen. The annexed land claimed by Amestris, Ishval, launches into total civil war against the greater state after a soldier from the capital city central shot an innocent child dead. The Ishval people could no longer contain their frustration for their occupiers. The flames of war were lit. The Ishval Civil War would mark the beginning of the alchemists who were registered in the government, serving not just as researchers and servants to the general public, but as soldiers, as weapons of war. This civil war would mark only one of many conflicts Amestris would participate in to expand their power and domain. There were those among the state alchemists that questioned their actions in Ishval, despised themselves for the lives they took. But there were also those who enjoyed the killing, took pleasure in the massacres of the land's people. One of great note, Sulfje Kimbley, the Crimson Lotus alchemist that was chosen to wield the Philosopher's Stone by the upper brass of Amestris. A stone created in secret using Ishval prisoners of war, with the power of life and destruction in his hand. He wiped out countless villages, becoming obsessed with the power this stone possessed. By the end of the conflict, Kimbley would be imprisoned as a war criminal after refusing to give up the stone, killing his superior officers who attempted to seize it from him, but not before igniting a young warrior monk's path into the cycle of hatred. A man who would relinquish his name after watching his village and brother die before his eyes, choosing to use the power his dying brother gave him to seek vengeance for his people. The Ishval conflict would end with nearly their entire race wiped off the earth. Those that remained fled to the ruins of the kingdom of Xerxes to escape death. The state alchemists would be haunted by their involvement in the conflict for years to come, but given their efficiency in killing, the government would continue to use them as weapons of war. The atrocities committed by Amestris would fuel the young alchemist Roy Mustang to seek power and position in the government and change the state from the inside. The true purpose behind the Ishval conflict would remain confidential and only shared with those in the highest seats in the military. The only humans that know of Father's plans, of his quest to become a god. Similar to the king of Xerxes, these high-ranking generals only had a lust for personal gain. Promising them immortal life for their assistance was enough of a justification for the atrocities they'd commit. Like the king, these generals are foolish to believe that Father sees them as anything more than pawns to be used. He cares not for their kind, much less would he gift them with immortality. As time went on, Van decided to travel back west, passing through the ruins of Xerxes and into Amestris where he'd meet a woman named Pinocchio. The pair would become drinking buddies through decades of time. Despite noticing Van's unchanging age, Pinocchio did not fear nor bother him with prying questions. Feeling accepted around her, they remained close through time. On one of his visits to Pinocchio's village, Resemble, Van comes across a woman named Trisha, falling in love with her. At first he fights these feelings, believing himself to be a monster undeserving of this emotion, but Trisha makes him feel human once again, telling him his inability to age does not change what is in his heart. Van would still face these insecurities after 2 of their children are born, but it was comforting knowing that there was someone who loved him, despite his curse. He loved his kids more than anything in the world, but he feared touching them, scared that he'd pass on this curse of life he suffers. Noticing this, Trisha puts their firstborn Edward into his hands, tears streaming down the man's face. This moment is something incredibly important to him, marking the first time he's held their son, but it's also upsetting he won't be able to age along with his kids and Trisha. He fears the day his family will die and he will be left behind, alone yet again, just as so many have died around him since the day Xerxes fell. With these thoughts in mind, Hohenheim decides he must leave and put an end to his immortality, and confront the dwarf in the flesh that plans to seize more lives. Van promises Trisha he will return to her once again, but as a mortal, so they can live out their lives and at the end die together, watching over their children. Only Van seems to underestimate how much time stopping the dwarf will take, and how little his family has. Only a few months after Van leaves, Trisha suffers the plague of 1904 and passes. Ed and Al are left alone, Pinocchio choosing to look after them following the funeral. Ed blames his father for not being there when Mother was sick and holds this anger into the foreseeable future. A couple months go by before he and his brother would be taken under the wing of Izumi Curtis, an alchemist traveling from a neighboring town, the two convincing her to teach them the science of alchemy. They learn a great deal from their teacher, and after 6 months studying under her, she sends them home, deeming them efficient enough in alchemy and in martial arts to study on their own. But what she didn't know is what exactly they would use their knowledge to attempt. Human transmutation is a dark smudge on the practice of alchemy, which involves an alteration of a human life form. In Ed and Al's case, bringing back their mother from the dead. This form of human transmutation, we'll call resurrection, is practically impossible to achieve, given once a human is already deceased and their soul has passed into the afterlife. The goal of transmutation is unattainable, the soul out of reach from the physical realm. There was never any hope they could resurrect their mother, though they know no better. The pair begin the ritual, only to face the consequences for their grave mistake. The Gate of Truth, a metaphysical and metaphorical gate within the mind of each human, holding within the knowledge of the universe, guarding it, a white figure known as Truth. Ed has been summoned to this space due to the laws of alchemy. There is not cancellation nor failure in transmutation, only what is known as rebound. If not enough is sacrificed for what is desired, the forces of alchemy seize that which must be sacrificed. To do this, the alchemist who began the transmutation is summoned before Truth. Truth takes what's necessary for the transmutation to complete, and for the forces of alchemy to once more reach an equilibrium state. And as a reward for paying their toll, the alchemists pass through the gates of truth, being exposed to the knowledge of the world, but only that equal to what they have given up. For Ed, who is forced to give up a leg as payment for trying to resurrect their mom, he only knows so much. But for Al, who has lost his entire body as payment, his mind was privy to much more. The rush of this deep knowledge has a heavy mental and physical toll, but if survived, grants the user strong knowledge in the alchemy arts, allowing one to perform alchemy without the use of circles. Returning to the physical realm, Ed sees that the cost of the gate is not worth the knowledge. In the middle of the circle, an amalgamized organism that resembles that of a human. Yet this living creature has no soul. The creature reaches to the sky, moans echoing across the basement, only for its cries to cease as its arm falls lifeless. Blood soaks the stone floor. Ed believes they have brought their mother back to this earth, only to give her this crude form and cause her suffering and death for a second time. He holds on to this burden of killing their mother, without the knowledge they could never have recalled her soul to begin with. To his left lays Al's clothes, the only sign of his existence. Ed cannot accept yet another loss. He pushes over a suit of armor that leaned against the wall. With the knowledge he gained from the Gate of Truth, he draws a blood rune within the armor, which will recall his brother's soul that is yet to pass over to the afterlife. Since his body was now property of Truth, his soul has yet to pass on, and so he comes to reside within this armor through yet another human transmutation, human soul binding. As payment for once again playing with human life, Ed must give up his arm to Truth. He saved his brother's soul, yet the cost to do so is not ideal. Al becomes a prisoner to this cold and lifeless form, incapable of feeling pain or warmth, hunger or fatigue. He lives, human in mind, but hollow in form. Reality can be quite cruel. As a way of burying their past, Ed and Al burned their childhood home before setting off from town. They decided to devote their life to the Amestris military so they can access the obscenely large amounts of research the capital Central possesses. Ed believes that if they can find the materials needed to create what they've come to know as the Philosopher's Stone, they could restore Al's body along with Ed's missing limbs he's had replaced by Automel prosthetics. The famed Flame State Alchemist of the Ishval War, Colonel Roy Mustang, desires to use Ed's abilities to help shape his country into a more proper state in exchange for allowing Ed full access to the country's research for his own personal goals. By 1911, 1 year after their failed attempt to resurrect their mother and forced knowledge of advanced alchemy, Edward Elric is sworn in as a state alchemist, being nicknamed the Fullmetal Alchemist after his prosthetics. Alphonse becomes his partner as they carry out their duties for the militaristic government, researching a solution to their deprived bodies in their free time. The story of the Fullmetal Alchemist truly begins, as Father's plans for what he coins as the Promised Day are only a year away. The Elric brothers have yet to track down a legitimate lead on the Philosopher's Stone, arriving in the city of Riol to a crack of an old priest who wielded what they believed to be a fake stone, but was rather one that had dried from usage. The priest used alchemy arts to deceive the town folk into believing he could perform miracles, living in luxury from the goods he claimed for his services. Ed defeats the fraud and shuts down his operations, believing the man to be taking advantage of those who lack academic knowledge, something all too common throughout history. The two conclude that they've reached a dead end in Riol, and the Elrics return to Central to look into an interesting lead the priest had presented them with. He had created a large chimera with his stone to fight against them, wanting to know if this alchemy could help them find a solution for their bodies. The brothers depart down a dark road of alchemy, which knowledge in may weigh on their conscience. As a thanks for their work in Riol, Mustang introduces Ed and Al to a man named Sewing Life Shoal, a leader in chimera research for the state who was once able to create a chimera that understood human language. The brothers are allowed to study Sho's research in his personal library, but sensing that this alchemy won't provide them with many answers, they oftentimes get distracted and play with Sho's daughter, Nina. Nina has grown quite lonely as her father works around the clock preparing for his state alchemist assessment. For him to retain his title and funding, he must produce some kind of results from his research. State alchemists are widely feared by the general public for the atrocities they've committed in the past. But while this disdain is rather deeply rooted, it's not often one would be murdered, much less a fair handful by one man. The state believes this man we come to know as Scar has been targeting alchemists of great note as a penance for their shifting morals away from service to the people towards pursuit of funding, even if it means performing unethical experimentation. Alchemy has a certain darkness to it that is able to reveal the horrors mankind is capable of. The Elric brothers have seen this firsthand, and now they see it yet again. Sho has once more created a chimera capable of speech. Since entering his home, the brothers made note of how awfully quiet the place has fallen. His dog and Nina are nowhere to be found, which leads Ed to make the connection. The creature before them is none other than Nina, just as his wife had disappeared 2 years before when Sho had created his first talking chimera. Now his daughter fell to a similar fate. What this man will do for money and status knows no bounds. Ed cannot accept this. His ideas of alchemy being a wonderful tool for mankind fail to explain why a man would experiment on their only child, but Sho tests him, pointing the finger at Ed in his attempts to resurrect his mother and his use of a blood rune to bond his brother's soul to that armor. To Sho, Ed is no better than he. Lumping Ed in with himself crosses a line. Ed throws fist after fist in a rage, Al stopping him from killing Sho. The two leave to report this atrocity to the state, saying goodbye to Nina, frustrated they can't do anything to change her back. As the rain clouds grow thicker around Central, Scar pays a visit to the father and daughter, putting down the alchemist that has strayed from the proper path and giving Nina a release from her terrible fate. Reality is dictated by the majority. What is taken as truth in our world isn't exactly what it seems. If a majority believe a lie, then that lie is deemed truth. Riol has once more fallen to this concept. The people of the town wage riots against each other, the priest returning to his role, some defending his seat of power, others against the fraud, knowing him to be lying. The fear of faith and the consequences of going against it fuels the people's ignorance, and it doesn't help that 3 of the deadly sins work behind the scenes to ensure misinformation spreads, and that Riol becomes yet another of the 5 points of bloodshed to complete the nationwide transmutation circle. Father's children, envy, lust, and gluttony, continue to manipulate the populace by having envy pose as the priest, as Ed is still coming to terms with Nina's death. Scar's hunt on the alchemist continue. This time his prey is the Fullmetal Alchemist. His motivations stem from his brother's death during the massacres in the Ishval Civil War. He was consumed by the quest for vengeance, and this hatred clouds his eyes. Scar will attack anyone with note among the state alchemy ranks, even Ed, who was much too young to ever wrong the Ishvalans. Realizing the overpowering strength of Scar, Ed realizes he will not be able to best him. He asks Scar for only one thing before his death, to promise to spare his brother Al. Respecting their brotherly bond as it reminds him of his own, Scar accepts, and hesitates momentarily before killing the alchemist, giving Colonel Mustang and the state time to arrive in force to deter Scar. Outnumbered and outmatched, he retreats out of public eye. Al reprimands his brother, frustrated that he would accept death so quickly instead of running from Scar like he told him to do. He knows Ed's talent can lead them to not only find a way to reobtain their bodies, but also revert transmutations like the one used on Nina by her father. As someone with an ability to better the future, he has a duty to uphold, a responsibility to research these possibilities for the sake of people like Nina. The 2 brothers lay there, battered and beaten, but better for it. Ed can now move forward with clear motivation. Needing to fix his arm, Ed, Al, and their escort Major Armstrong depart back to Resemble to see the rock bells at the repair shop. Along the journey, they stop in a town after seeing Dr. Marco, a state alchemist who had resigned with a heavy heart for his part in the Ishval Civil War. He's initially hesitant to help Ed, who wants to know more of his research of the Philosopher's Stone, but eventually tells him where he can find his hidden notes regarding the stone, trusting Ed will understand the consequences that it breeds. The trio presses onward to the repair shop, where their childhood friend Winry pulls all-nighters to repair Ed's arm. After 3 nights and 3 days, he's once more complete, and after fixing Al's armor, they return to Central to uncover Dr. Marco's hidden research. Only it seems they took too long. Marco's research would seem to be lost, and now so is he, being deemed missing since the day they saw him. There's mystery around his disappearance, but more worrying is Scar's continued serial killings of prominent alchemists. Mustang orders an escort to be put on Full Metal as he was a previous target. While Ed is rather annoyed by this, it ends up solving their own problem of the burned Marco research. Their new escorts Ross and Brosh tell them of a librarian who worked in the burned down First Branch Library. Sheska, who is capable of recreating documents by memory. Sheska is familiar with Marco's research docs and inscribes them for the brothers who spend the next week deciphering its contents. After cracking his code, they are privy to the harsh realities of the Philosopher's Stone. The key ingredient is none other than a live human. The brothers feel they have reached the end of their road. They are not so selfish as to sink to such a level as human sacrifice to regain their bodies. But remembering Marco had said to look for the truth within the truth, Ed connects the dots from his notes that the abandoned Central 5 lab must have been the location of the Philosopher's Stone Marco had referenced being involved in the creation of during the Ishval's Civil War, given the fact that Lab 5 is located next to Central's prison, inmates on death row, the perfect test subjects in human experimentation. They sneak out to uncover the lab's secrets, only to find that it's not as abandoned as claimed. Ed and Al both engage 2 separate human experiments, 2 serial killers who have had their souls infused to a set of armor with a blood rune, opening up a new fear that the state has been performing human experimentation off the record, but they'll receive no information on what atrocities Lab 5 has committed. Both envy and lust appear before Edward, telling him to stay out of trouble and wait for the promised day, as he is one of the chosen human sacrifices. What exactly this means is wrapped in the mystery of Father's plan, but we know that to be a human sacrifice means passing through the gate and meeting truth, as both Ed and Al have, along with their father Van. 5 of these human sacrifices are needed, so it is vital that they keep Ed alive until the time comes. However, they cannot allow him to snoop around and learn of the secrets of Amestris, so they destroy the lab and deliver his unconscious body to Al before leaving. Once more, the brothers are no closer to their objective, and now, a group has appeared who will not allow them to delve into these matters further. More questions appear without any answers. In need of repairs, Winry makes her way to Central to fix Ed's arm. The aftermath of the lab's destruction leaves a lot of unknowns, but the fewer of Amestris, Bradley, visits the brothers' hospital room, telling them he knows of the enemy they face, yet he asks them to look no further into this issue. He'll call upon them when the time is right, and the moment to strike the enemy has come. His charisma and power make his word unquestionable, but one has to question why the Fuhrer would stop their research into what happened in Lab 5 unless he has something to hide. It could be that he too is wrapped up in the mess the quest for the stone has created. Ed and Al travel to visit their old master, seeking answers to their questions and to re-strengthen their abilities, while things heat up within Central. Due to the strings of deaths among state alchemists, positions have opened up in the higher brass, and Mustang has been chosen for a higher ranking position. His quick climb to the top at such a young age makes him a target of envy. He must be sure to keep those he would call friends close, as the amount that would call him an enemy grows. Hughes looks into the ongoing riots of Riol and starts to see a connection with the other cities that have either suffered or continue to be torn by unrest, including Ishval's controversial past. Things suddenly begin to click. The reason behind the government's campaigns of destruction, why they've let the unrest in outer towns continue, the silence of information on Lab 5 and the Philosopher's Stone. The entire state of Amestris is constructed as a transmutation circle to create a stone. With this realization, Hughes knows too much. Lust enters the room to put him down. He's able to kill the woman, giving him time to flee before she resurrects, making his way to a phone booth, carefully choosing not to use a government phone, knowing that whatever plot there is to create the stone, someone high up at the military is most definitely involved. He attempts to make a call to Mustang, but envy appears behind him, and before the call can pass through, Captain Hughes is dead. Hughes was a family man, and he's left behind his daughter and wife. It's unfair the one who has the most to lose in life was the one to lose his. He was too kind for his own good and too smart as well. Roy promises to bring whoever did this to justice, retracing his friend's steps. Major Armstrong cryptically gives him all the information he needs, that there were multiple people involved, and that Ed and Al's search for the stone led to Hugh coming to some conclusion. When asked to speak more, it becomes clear someone above even Mustang has told him not to speak of the matter. It's clear within the military there are moles, or more to say, the military itself is not what it seems. As Mustang's promotion is completed, he aims to investigate the higher staff within the capital. Ed and Al sit down with their old instructor and talk about the gate of truth that they've all seen. Izumi had at one point tried to resurrect her stillborn baby, which had resulted with her too coming in contact with truth and the gate. It seems due to the amount of the gate's information Al was exposed to being so great in comparison to Ed and Izumi's, that his mind has repressed the memory to ensure he would not go mentally insane, having paid the greatest toll of all, his entire physical being. This would be a logical conclusion. As they research ways to rekindle lost memories, Al is kidnapped by a bunch of chimera lackeys who take him to their boss, Greed. This sin becomes the Elric Brothers' introduction to homunculi beings, but unlike the others they will soon meet, Greed simply wants information from Al on how his soul was able to possess the armor, practically making him an immortal being. Greed's only pursuit in life is that of commodity and luxury, and to enjoy these materialistic things for eternity, he must have a body that can do so. While he may be over 200 years old and have fast-acting regenerative properties, he is still not fully immortal. He will die one day, but Al is different from him. He does not rely off the souls of a philosopher's stone. Al tells Greed his brother is the one who has knowledge of soul binding and not him, and so Greed tries to contact Ed. Though Al is not interested in pleasantries, simply picking a fight with the messenger, storming into the bar with conflict in mind, not diplomacy. Unwilling to hear Greed out for a simple exchange of information, Ed attacks the Sin, the tides quickly favoring Greed as he reveals his ability to coat his skin in unbreakable armor, but Ed exposes the weakness in this ability. Since Greed's body is mostly human, the only thing that could be creating this armor is carbon. Given that both diamond and graphite are composed solely of carbon, the two only one single atom in difference, Ed manipulates Greed's molecular structure, opening holes in the armor allowing for a counterattack. He is, however, badly injured, and his sensei Izumi steps in to finish what El started. Sensing the danger, Greed flees the scene, escaping into the sewers only to be met by the Führer himself. The fight quickly gets out of hand. It's obvious the Führer has no interest in taking prisoners, disposing of the Chimera lackeys, shedding Greed like a block of cheese. It's strange that he would rather not question these inhuman beings. That confusion is quickly cleared as Führer Bradley's eye patch is stripped off his face amidst battle, revealing that he is in fact a homunculus himself. The Führer is yet another sin, puppeteering mankind to Father's dance. Bradley reprimands Greed, continuously killing him till his Philosopher's Stone is on the brink of being empty. Wrath then kills the final enemy that hides within Al's armor, the blood coating his rune, somehow activating the dormant memories of the gate within him. The sheer rush of knowledge causes Al to fall unconscious. Al comes to in the hallway. The corpse dragged from his chest lies in front of him, a simple white cloth covering their face. Führer Bradley interrogates Ed in front of him, attempting to weigh just how much the brothers know of the homunculi in the stone. But more importantly, his questioning leads him to the revelation that not just Ed has seen the gate, but so too has Al. He also is able to confirm that their teacher Izumi has been in contact with the gate. Their quota of 5 human sacrifices are now just 1 person away. Bradley leaves the town and returns to Central, entering into the recesses of command to return to Father, a lost sin. Greed quite obviously is the misfit among the mix, which is the least surprising thing given his name. He's uninterested in serving Father and would rather die than be his pawn, such is his fate. Father melts him back down to the most pure form of a philosopher's stone, resembling a liquid that has the appearance of wine. He returns the desire back to his body, dismissing the sins present back to their duties for the promised day. The sins bat no eyes at the death of one of their own, and return to their post. With no more information to go off of, the Elrics decide to return to Central. Armstrong had told them to keep a low profile on what they do, given he suspects the military is far more corrupt than he and Mustang initially thought. Roy is still searching for answers himself, interrogating the soul transmutated armor man that escaped Lab 5 before its destruction. Barry the Chopper. This leads him to understand that a large cover-up was employed involving all the researchers that created Barry's current form, which involved sacrificing them into a philosopher's stone. With how many lives have been lost and no trail to prove it, there's a lot he still does not know. To complicate things more, the Elric brothers run into a traveler and son of the Emperor of Xing, Ling Yao. Ling believes immortality of the philosopher's stone will allow him to become the next in line for the throne, and so hearing that a mistress holds its secrets, he's decided to travel here. Ed refuses to give up any information in the stone to the foreigner, and so Ling decides to follow Ed until he does, tagging along as they make their way back to Central, as does Scar, finally making his return after disappearing off their radar. Having been gone for so long, the brothers were unaware of Captain Hugh's death. Feeling responsible for getting him involved in their investigation, they ponder whether the lives lost in their quest for the stone are worth the results. Hugh's wife tells them they shouldn't give up on what they seek. Doing so would make her husband's determination to seek out the truth meaningless. They find it in themselves to press forward for answers, as Mustang does the same, though he's begun flying too close to the sun. He and his crew have become a target of the homunculi as they are getting too close to the truth behind the military. Because of Roy's potential as the 5th human sacrifice, killing him is out of the question, so they think up a more creative way to keep him in line. Lieutenant Ross becomes wrapped in the framing of the murder of Hughes. The same caliber of bullet she uses in her firearm was found at the scene, and under this suspicion she's taken in as prime suspect. Hearing this, Mustang plots a breakout to stage her death, burning a dummy skeleton beyond recognition they used to fake her death, taking her into hiding while they attempt to locate what and who exactly is trying to take out those loyal to Mustang. Additionally, Roy orders Major Armstrong to take Ed east, knowing his hot-headed personality would only get in the way of the operation goals in Central. Within the ruins of Xerxes, Armstrong and Ed learn that Ross will travel through the desert to Zing, where she'll be safe until further notice. Seeing that she's still alive, Ed's personality calms down some, Mustang knowing it would take Ed visual proof to trust him. Unlike his brother, Ed runs on the emotional side of things. The secondary objective in Central commences, drawing out those responsible for the framing. Since Envy and Lust are currently attempting to track Mustang, they make it known that they have buried the Chopper's soul-infused armor with them. This results in the homunculi releasing the soul-depraved body of Barry, which is able of tracking down its own soul to locate where exactly their hideout is, resulting in the streets of Central erupting in chaos as Gluttony attacks Hawkeye's lookout position. This draws Mustang out of his office and into the field. With his help, the group is able to incapacitate Gluttony for the time being, and they follow Barry's body back to Sender, Al joining them on their crusade. The body slips into the Capitol's third laboratory, which is evidence enough to prove that the homunculi they've encountered are conspiring with those in high-ranking government positions. Barry, however, does not call it a day here and continues into the lab, the group deciding to follow him, using him as a probable cause to enter for an investigation. They split into two teams to search the lab, Mustang and Havoc running into the first wall. Lust appears before them, mocking Roy's inability to save his friend from an untimely death. They exchange blows, Lust taking the advantage after successfully bursting a water pipe, rendering Roy's flame alchemy useless. He's able to tactically execute a transmutation of the water to become hydrogen and oxygen so that they can light the air. Havoc throwing in a lighter, bringing the entire chamber to rubble. It would seem they've successfully defeated the witch, but that assumption can prove deadly. The homunculi don't die easily, Lust regenerating before their eyes. Havoc drops to the ground, pierced in multiple vital points, unable to move. Roy rips the stone from her chest in an effort to kill her, but she once more regenerates her body, wrapping around his hand, using this to restrain him and slip her claws into his stomach. As Roy falls to the ground in pain, she takes his transmutation gloves that allow him to create fire and leaves the pair to die together. The doors before them seem as important as they are. Behind them lies Father's lair, though they know not of who this man is just yet. These doors remain shut as Lust confronts them before they can enter. She boasts of the murder of Roy and Havoc, sending Hawkeye, who deeply cares for Roy, into despair. She attacks without clear intent, with only hate and anger leading her emotions. She quickly gives in to the futility of her situation. However, Al stands strong. He defends Hawkeye from this monster, dedicated to preventing another person from dying. As Lust strips his armored body bit by bit, she laments how much of a pity it is to kill two human sacrifices in one night. But it would seem she's yet to kill even one. Mustang appears in the doorway, having cauterized his and Havoc's wounds using a lighter and transmutated circle drawn on his hand with soot. He attacks Lust. Al constructs a wall in between Lust and him, sheltering Hawkeye from harm as Roy annihilates any trace of the homunculus's existence. He slowly chips away at the remaining essence within her stone until nothing is left to reform her body. She becomes nothing more than dust. Fewer Bradley stands in the doorway, sheathing his sword, knowing the day is lost. It's better he plays his role and makes no more of a scene. There's no point to endanger the sacrifices or expose his identity. The alchemists have successfully killed one of the 7 homunculi, though 5 more still roam the shadows. But for today, they can claim a small victory. On his way back from the ruins of Xerxes, Ed had learned of how Winry's parents died during the Ishval Civil War, falling at the hands of Scar, blinded by rage when waking from his brother's death. He killed the 2 doctors that saved his life. Ed knows the state alchemists have committed atrocities against Ishval. He knows this is what created the killer known as Scar, but it doesn't justify the lives he took of 2 innocent doctors. He may have not had control over himself, but the sin he committed cannot be forgiven. The man has been challenged in the path he walks by his former teachers, telling him his brother, who he walks down this path to avenge, would never have wanted this for him. His master warns him to see reason, to stop this cycle of hatred, to live life without bringing to it more death. But Scar has a vendetta to see to. The cycle continues as Ed stumbles upon his father. Confronting his past proves difficult, both the pent-up anger he has for his father and that of what he left in this town. Having been gone for nearly a decade, Hohenheim has just learned of Trish's death and his failure to keep his promise and die by his wife's side. Pinako had also told him of the brothers' sin of attempting to resurrect their mother, which is where the father and son's conversation quickly drifts towards. He asks Ed if the true reason he burned down the family home was to burn the physical reminder of the atrocity they committed there. This strikes a chord in Ed, choosing to run from this conversation and leave his father to reflect over his wife's grave. Child or not, what's happened between them has made them more strangers than family. Van still cares for Ed as a father would, but Ed sees him as anything but. Van and Pinako talk of the past in the main room, getting on to the topic of what the brothers had done that day several years ago. Sensing that Ed is eavesdropping on their conversation, Van makes very clear that what they created could not be their mother, prompting Ed to have a realization. The next day, Hohenheim leaves. This visit was quite possibly his last. His return to this homestead meant that what he had been searching for all these years was found. He has made the preparations to face his distant past with father, with the promised day on the horizon. Heeding his father's words, Ed and Pinako dig up the remains of the creature he had created that day, finding that neither the hair, height, nor sex of the thing matched their mother. The grief he had carried for causing his mother's suffering and death a second time is lifted from his chest. This discovery also leads to a new conclusion that human resurrection is not possible, meaning that for Al's soul to still be present in this physical plane, his body has to be recoverable. It would seem during the transmutation, the brothers' souls got partially entwined, Al's body nurturing off Ed's to maintain form within the gate, waiting for his return. Ed shares this new finding with Izumi as he returns to Central, prompting her to check for herself that the creature she had summoned was in fact not her child. Ed's conclusion proves yet again to be true, Izumi relieved knowing she had not put her baby through such a tormenting second death. From the bottom of her heart, she thanks Edward for sharing this with her. In Central, Ed explains his findings to Al, allowing the brothers to move forward from their past, better understanding the sin they committed and how they can make right their wrongs. Envy is pissed wrath let lust die, but he stands by his decision. To him, first and foremost is keeping the human sacrifices alive. He has ensured they have 5, and to endanger that number is out of the question. But this objective is a double-edged sword. Knowing that they are sacrifices, the Elric brothers can use this at any time to draw out the homunculi by putting themselves in danger. And so to settle 2 scores at once, Ed makes himself bait for Scar to come out of hiding as well, reports noting that he's already killed several state alchemists in Central since his return. Scar takes this bait, Ed and him entering combat. His secondary goal here is to confirm the fact that Scar killed the Rockbell parents, which, judging by the tattoo on his right arm being described as their killer, it's true. Gluttony and Wrath finally appear on the scene to ensure Ed and Al don't die, but they're intercepted by Lan Fan and Ling. These two have difficulty fending off the homunculi, going on retreat after Lan Fan is severely injured. It's all Ling can do to keep them at bay. Using several flash and smoke grenades, he's able to put some ground between him and the Sins. Lan Fan pushes him to discard her and save himself. In her state, she's only making things more difficult for him. Ling refuses to do so, forcing them to pursue another plan, but one still with sacrifice. On their trail, Wrath orders Gluttony to deal with the Scar issue, seeing that this pair won't give him much more trouble. As he continues his pursuit, his earlier statement seems arrogant. He had followed the blood trail only to arrive at the discarded arm of Lan Fan tied to a dog to play decoy. She and Ling successfully escaped the Führer's wrath. Things on this front have heated up. Winry had stumbled onto the battlefield only to learn that the man in front of her was the one who killed her parents. In despair, she tries to kill Scar, which, seeing her anger as justified, his killing of her parents a deep regret. He gives her a window to shoot and kill him. Not wanting to see Winry become a murderer, Ed is able to talk her down and get a few state alchemists to take her somewhere safer as they continue their battle, which is interrupted by Gluttony. Ling stays true to his word, appearing on the scene to assist in restraining the Sin. He loads him up in a jeep with Hawkeye and takes off while Ed and Al put Scar on the ropes. Just as they are about to land the finishing blow, Scar's traveling companion from Xing he met after recovering from his battles, Mei Shang, appears to save him, creating a diversion they use to escape. As the dust settles, it's clear the battle is over, but their fight has just begun. The Rockbell's killer remains alive, and 4 homunculi remain in play, 2 dead and 1 captured. With so many parties involved, there was no doubt to be conflict. Ed, Al, Mustang, and Ling all argue over who should get the Philosopher's Stone within Gluttony. Ling claims that Lan Fan's sacrifice should give him the right, Ed and Al wanting it to reclaim their bodies, Mustang wanting to use it to cure Havoc's paralyzed back from fighting lust. Upon the mention of lust, Roy isn't mindful of who exactly is in the room with them, unaware of how much Gluttony cared for the sin, and how much hearing that this man killed her would send him into a rage. He breaks free from his restraints, his belly opening up to reveal an eye that resembles the gate god within. Teeth surround this new opening. Gluttony has awoken to his true form, capable of devouring any mass within his sight. Mustang is forced to retreat along with Lan Fan, both still recovering from major injuries, Hawkeye taking them to the doctor's home. Gluttony cannot be allowed to live, however, having seen each of their faces. If he returns to the other homunculi, the operation and everyone involved will be exposed. Ed, Al, and Ling are entrusted with killing the monster. Envy enters the scene attempting to collect Gluttony and leave, but his ego quickly gets himself wrapped up in the battle. Ling confronting Envy as Ed and Al fight Gluttony. Each group is evenly matched. One wrong move, all that separates the tide of battle. The brothers are the first to make a mistake, Gluttony getting the best of them and aiming to assist Envy in their battle. Ed dives to shove Ling out of Gluttony's path of destruction, but he's too late. He, Envy, and Ling are devoured by Gluttony's stomach. Al is left alone, fearing that he's lost his brother to this monster. Within the void that was Father's failed attempt to replicate the Gate of Truth, Ed and Ling remain stranded, forced to eat a leather boot to survive. The pair eventually stumble upon Envy, and given their hopeless scenario, he shares a lot of information regarding Father and the homunculi, even revealing he was the soldier that started the conflict in Ishval, shooting the child whose death created the chaos that ensued. Enraged, Envy was partially responsible for the death of the Rockbells. Ed attacks Envy, the group erupting into a brawl until they exhaust themselves. As the fighting dies down, they call a truce after Ed believes he's found a way for them to return to reality.
なぜ私を生かしておくのですか?
Roy misinterpreted Hugh's original warning to him. He thought the military had been infiltrated by the enemy, but in reality, the enemy has always been the military. The upper brass always knew of the homunculi, and believing that they would be granted great power, they have assisted them in their plans for the promised day. Bradley meets with Mustang, explaining how the homunculi have ruled the government body since its inception. He himself is a rather new member, the last homunculi to be created, Father having injected him with his wrath, imbued in a Philosopher's Stone after he passed a rigorous selection exam to become the next viewer. Roy wonders why Bradley would be so open about the exact secrets he's been trying to figure out, but it becomes obvious this is Bradley claiming victory over him, in an act to flex his political power to Mustang, and to show the futility of trying to take him down. The viewer transfers all the state alchemists loyal to Roy, some sent north, others sent east, west, and south. Bradley makes Roy's most trusted ally, Riza Hawkeye, his personal assistant. She becomes somewhat of a hostage to keep Mustang from trying anything further, and this is just the beginning of it. The Elric Brothers are the next he will ensure remain docile. Having realized that if they were to pass through the true Gate of Truth, the three of them would be able to escape this pseudo-version of it. They prepare to perform a human transmutation, Ed deciding to deconstruct and reconstruct his body as a safe version of this alchemy. They use a portion of Envy's stone as sacrifice for the transmutation, and pass through the Gate of Truth, though this time, Edward's gate does not stand alone in this void of space. Across from him is Alphonse's body, now nourished, but alive nonetheless. His theory that he and his brother's soul had intertwined that day was correct, and so here he is, body still intact. He tries to walk over to his brother, but is reminded by truth that he cannot take anything but his soul from this realm. The gate opens behind him, the god dragging him back to reality. Ed struggles against its grasp, calling out to his brother that he'll return, that one day he will bring his body back to Earth as the gate closes. Al and Gluttony have gone to Father's lair as a way to sort out what exactly happened to Edward, being tailed by May and Scar. And now, as if solving the issue, Ed, Ling, and Envy reappear. What we would first assume would result in a giant brawl becomes nothing of the sort, Father at first taking a passive role while the Elric brothers attempt to fight him. He simply observes them, taking note of their likeness to Hohenheim. They find that their alchemy has no effect due to Father's ability to negate it, and after some thought, Father decides to turn Ling into a homunculus, per the man's request, using the sin of greed as the product. Ling relinquishes his body to it, returning greed to Father's side, though this one is slightly different than the one Ed and Al had met. This one obeys father. It seems he decided to recreate greed while omitting the memories he had gained through his experiences prior. The room once more turns into a battleground. Father watches as his children take on the Elric Brothers. Scar attempting to take out father, his unique alchemy style, something father cannot null as it does not have the same principles of Amestra's alchemy. The group is eventually forced to retreat, exhausted from battle. Owl orders Scar to take May and leave. He and Ed will distract the homunculi. As sacrifices, they won't be killed. This act of compassion catches Scar off guard, forcing him to reflect on who exactly his hate is directed towards, and how many he's killed that deserve no divine punishment. Before he can take May from within Al's armor, the two are separated as the brothers are captured and taken to Fuhrer Bradley in the capital's central command, just above their current position. Gluttony finally succumbs to the many deaths he's experienced, dying in the hands of father, who promises to recreate him with memories intact. It appears as long as something remains of the sin, they can be reborn. But unlike greed or gluttony, nothing remained of lust upon death. At the very least, humanity had destroyed one homunculi. Being brought in front of Wrath, the brothers are threatened with Winry's safety to maintain secret of the homunculi and remain in the military. Bradley will not let them leave as he must keep an eye on them until the promised day, but he does allow them to continue their quest to obtain their bodies. They're dismissed, though Ed can't shake the feeling they've lost and become puppets of father's bidding. The doctor who desired retribution for his part in the Ishval War got what he wanted. Painted on the wall in his blood the words vengeance, scarred during his escape from the homunculi lair, finding the doctor, and giving him the death he wanted after learning of the truth behind his people's massacre. But Envy is not stupid enough to fall for that. With her specialty in transformation, she can easily tell that this is a dummy corpse. Scar has freed the doctor and escaped with him. The story leaves Central, all roads reuniting in the North City. Scar took Marco on the run to investigate further the notes his brother left him, hidden in the north. With him is May, and given that the Elrics have been searching for May to learn alchemy from, as it is one of the forms of alchemy that can defy father, their journey takes them to the north as well. The war criminal Soph Kimberly is chosen to be released by the Fuhrer, Envy giving him the orders that earned his freedom, to pursue the Ishvalan named Scar and capture Dr. Marco, who is traveling with him alive. All these plot threads meet at the frigid fortress of Fort Briggs.
確かにアレックス。飲んでくれねえのかよ!
Major General Oliver Armstrong does not enjoy formalities such as letters of introduction, nor does she particularly like her younger brother. She decides to take in the Elric Brothers, seeing that they're not spies for the neighboring country of Drachma that borders the north. Given the past war with the country, this border fortress stands as the first line of offense should the country show aggression. Her soldiers the strongest of Amestris, cultivated by harsh conditions and the dangers of the mountains. She learns of their mission to find the girl May and study her knowledge in alchemy. Wanting to research this form of alchemy for herself, she allows them room and board as long as they earn their keep. The brothers are taken on tour of Fort Briggs, which is interrupted by the first appearance of Sloth, who has burrowed into the fortress's lower levels, sending Briggs into high alert. The soldiers attempt to stop the monster from destroying the lower levels, but his skin is as thick as steel, bullets bouncing off, inflicting no damage to the sin. Armstrong orders the brothers to explain to her the monster they quite obviously have knowledge of. Well, they can't tell her its origins since Fuhrer Bradley still holds Winry's safety as leverage. They are able to explain his genetic makeup, which gives her a better idea how to annihilate the beast. She mounts her personal tank, aiming to deliver a blow that will restrict its movements and prevent it from causing any more damage to her soldiers in her fortress. The Major rams Sloth into the elevator shaft that takes him up to the top of the wall. There they douse the beast in fuel before pushing him off the outer wall into the freezing weather. The tank fuel evaporates along with any moisture in Sloth's body, rendering him frozen in place, incapable of moving. With this problem solved, Armstrong addresses the next, the fact the Elric brothers won't tell her all that they know. She brings them down into the tunnels created by Sloth, where they can spill without worrying of prying ears. Here they tell her everything, including the new discovery, Sloth's tunnels lead them to deduce. These tunnels create a transmutation array around Amestris, and the state's history of bloody unrest is marked within the 5 circles that complete the array. And as it would appear, Fort Briggs is the final node yet to see blood, but it would seem its destruction is only moments away. At the front gate, one of the many corrupt generals, Raven, along with Kimberly, pay a visit to the fort. Armstrong uses this situation to feign ignorance of the homunculi and attempts to learn more from General Raven. He takes this bait and asks if she wishes to be involved with the promised day. Knowing that if she declines, she'll be demoted and replaced with a new pawn, she bites her tongue and accepts the offer. But before they can discuss more, a harrowing reality is thrust upon them. A monster lurks within Sloth's holes, brutally murdering anyone who enters. Raven tells Armstrong she must seal the hole after putting Sloth back inside, which she is forced to oblige. As they begin filling the hole, Armstrong stabs the right hand of Raven, telling him she does not need a spot on his council. There will be a vacated seat very soon. He attempts to reach for his gun but isn't quick enough, being slashed through the chest, falling into the wet cement. As he melds into the foundation, he pities the fact he was so close to becoming immortal, a god amongst men. These generals are fools to believe that Father will give them such a gift. Fort Briggs prepares for their next move, as Ed and Al are once more reminded how tight a noose Bradley has around their necks. Kimberly escorts Winry to the boys' cell to fix Ed's arm, Bradley having sent her as a warning to them that if they step out of line, he won't hesitate to kill her. Ed is tasked of 3 things from the Fuhrer to ensure Winry's safety: find Scar, find Marco, and create a blood rune within Fort Briggs, which, like in all previous nodes of the massive transmutation circle, will result in violence and bloodshed being spilled over the rune to complete the circle. Ed despises this, but can't outright ignore the orders for Winry's sake. He tells Kimberly he'll begin with the hunt for Scar, as it would lead him to May as well. He explains the situation to Al and Winry, both deciding to join him on the hunt. Armstrong's right-hand man, Buccaneer, further explores the Sloth tunnels. He quickly comes up on the site of carnage, 2 lone survivors the only thing to tell their tale. They beg him to turn off his light or the shadows will come for them. Sure enough, they appear, crawling amongst the walls. He can sense from them the intent to kill, but before it attacks, it becomes hesitant, as if distracted, disappearing from the tunnels. It seems that the homunculus Pride was called back by his mother for bedtime, the killing of a few Briggs soldiers not interesting enough to blow his cover. Separating themselves from Kimberly, the Elric Brothers and Winry confront Scar. Major Miles calls in the arrest of Scar, but Marco and May inform him that they need Scar to decipher his brother's research that's been written in ancient Ishvalan. They have to shift their plan to account for this, Miles sharing with Scar that while he has chosen the path of destruction and hatred, causing even more animosity towards their people, Miles has chosen to change the perception of Ishvalans from within the social structure of Amestris. This causes Scar to reflect on his brother's words to him. That change takes patience and time, things Scar does not have. He seems to soften a bit and vows to pay for his crimes, but first he desires to help them in any way they can. They launch a plan to convince Kimberly Scar has escaped, as the entire Marco crew and Winry use a nearby mine shaft to covertly return to Fort Briggs. However, under the summons of the Fuhrer, Major General Armstrong is forced to travel to Central, and the fort is being overseen by Central soldiers. The loyalty to their Ice Queen is strong among Briggs soldiers, and any attempts to seize command will not be taken lightly. Something is beginning to stir within the fort, as Al attempts to stop the Marco crew from walking into the trap. Knowing that Bradley will not buy any story where she feigns involvement in Raven's death, she admits to killing the man for his loose lips and sharing information about the promised day. Bradley is impressed with her knowledge, and though he's unsure of how much he can trust her, regardless he must keep an eye on Oliver. She continues to play along with the game, asking for involvement in the plan. The Fuhrer accepts, Armstrong sinking even deeper into enemy territory. The bloodshed is put into motion as both the West and South cities suffer similar unrest. Kimberly has stopped his search for Scar under new orders from Pride to construct the blood rune now and begin the violence. He goes to the Drachma side of the border, coercing them to break the non-aggression pact with his aid along with soldiers from Central planted within Fort Briggs that will flip sides. This is all a ruse to fulfill the blood rune requirements, their corpses in the snow fulfilling this role. At the same time, Al and Marco's crew lure out Envy in an attempt to eliminate him. Thanks to Marco's expertise, they are able to quickly revert him to his true form, using a transmutation circle that disperses all souls residing in his Philosopher's Stone, reverting him to a small, pitiful slug. They send May back to Zing along with the slug as proof of her labor in discovering the secrets of the stone, seeing that soon Amestris will erupt in political conflict. A foreigner does not need to worry about these kinds of affairs. She's completed her duty for her country, though May has doubts about her leave. She's conflicted whether the slug will be enough to to convince the Emperor she is worthy to succeed him. Part of the group departs with Al to find leads on what happened to Ed, the boy having disappeared after leaving to divert Kimberly from their trail. They travel towards Riol, Al hoping to find answers at the town their quest went off the rails. Scar and Marco walk a different path, seeking out the people of Ishval to make preparations for a counterattack on the homunculi and father as the finale approaches. There are 3 rules of the state alchemist. Obey the military, do not create gold, and do not create human beings. This 3rd rule, while it may seem strange, is their way of ensuring no one attempts to create an army. But for the upper brass, that rule does not necessarily apply to them. Armstrong is introduced to this room full of mannequin-like bodies, lesser homunculi that will have souls ensnared in them, puppets for them to use to fight off any attempts to stop the promised day. All Oliver can do is look on in disbelief. It's somewhat haunting just what the generals are willing to do. How many morals are they willing to break? How many humans are they willing to damn? The 7 homunculi are strong, but they're not enough to hold back a coup, especially when one continues to disobey his master. Greed once more decides to betray Father after killing a friend from another life, causing him to realize he's being controlled, Ling's voice pushing him to rebel. He attacks Wrath in his home, questioning him why he can't remember when Wrath attacked him and his allies in the sewers. After some back and forth, Greed flees the scene, tormented by his splintered mind. Ed has found himself at Mustang's abandoned safe house outside the capital, believing that this would be where Al would think to rendezvous. It appears while they may be brothers, the two think drastically differently. Al having gone to Riol, where he was reunited with their father. It seems Edward and Ling, however, have similar thoughts. While Greed pouts within their body, Ling regains control over his form. He and Ed exchange information before Greed retakes control of Ling. Sensing he has more to gain from sticking with the homunculi, Ed offers to become his henchman, if it means Greed will side with them against Father. This is quite the growth for Ed, who was originally too hot-headed to just speak with Greed when they first met. If he had done so, there's no telling where they'd be now, but this is no time for regrets. Greed accepts Ed's proposal as the pieces continue to fall into place. The promised day has finally been given a date. The 2nd day in spring, when the North and East armies of Amestris will begin joint training exercises to prepare for the escalated conflict against Drachma. The day a full solar eclipse would take place, a necessary condition for Father's plan to succeed. In Central, Mustang makes preparations for his government coup that will share dates with the Day of Judgment. This information is passed around to all parties involved as the 4 remaining homunculi, Sloth, Gluttony, Wrath, and Pride, gather around their master. Only at 24 hours before the promised day, the North and East begin their joint exercises. Fuhrer Bradley, sensing that General Grumman of the East intends to assist in a grab for power in Central with his army, decides to oversee the drills. However, the Fuhrer has been outsmarted. Roy knew he would travel away from the capital, and Grumman is only a diversion for Mustang's team, who is heading straight for Central Command with Marco and Scar's small army of Ishvalans they recruited over the last few months of travel to assist in the takeover. Bradley immediately tries to return to Central, only to have his train bombed by the North's attempt to assassinate him. He's pronounced dead, though his body has not been found. This is reported back to the capital, where the upper brass lose their shit, their chain of command slowly falling apart. The attack on Wrath's life draws out Father from his basement, asserting his control over the situation, demanding the generals to see to that this coup is smothered. Elsewhere, Gluttony and Pride kidnap the freshly arrived Al, who is rather incapable of fighting. His soul has been having periods where his binded armor rejects his soul, the soul desiring to return to his original body, trapped within the gate. Ed is headed off by this entourage, Pride using Al as both weapon, shield, and hostage in an outskirt town near Central City, where their father is currently waiting to make his move. The greatest issue is Pride's shadow is unkillable, their only chance to wound him to attack his main body. Ed notices the shadows are stemming from somewhere within the woods, sending both his chimera men he's befriended over the past 3 months to locate the child. He casts a transmutation that destroys the town's light sources to hinder Pride's abilities to fight, but this acts as a double-edged sword, forcing him to fight with minimal eyesight. Luckily, Lan Fan and Fu join the fray. Along with Ling, they fight skillfully in the dark against the shadows and gluttony thanks to their ability to sense spiritual chi. The tides of battle turn as the Chimera severely wound Pride's body and Lan Fan brings gluttony to death's door. Sensing the urgency of their fate, the boy absorbs Gluttony's stone to regain his strength and launch a counterattack. With the two stones consumed and the fires around them growing, the tides of battle turn to the Shadow Homunculus' favor. Sacrificing himself for the team, Al baits Pride to once more possess his armored form, which is when Hohenheim steps in, trapping the two of them within a dirt spear. Pride has been taken out of the equation, but it took trapping Al as well. The group turns their attention to Central City, to Mustang's assault on the government headquarters, as Greed leaves the group in hopes of claiming the position of Führer for himself. Mustang's coup is in full swing. So far, they've disabled 60 state soldiers with ease, without a single life lost. His forces slowly march towards Central Command, the northern soldiers of Briggs backing his advancement, holding captured points. Ed, Van, Scar, and the Chimeras use the underground passages to bypass the above-ground conflict and advance straight to Father, hoping to stop him before the eclipse begins and avoid the nationwide transmutation circle altogether. Within command, Oliver kills one of the generals overseeing Central's forces and takes the other present general hostage, disrupting order among the soldiers. It would seem this overturn of power is going all too nicely. That is before a general makes the poor decision to release the lesser homunculi. These monsters activate with no sense of self, no allegiance to a master. Only bloodlust and hunger linger in their minds. They launch themselves at the nearby general, who becomes their first meal. Kimberly has been dispatched to free Pride, launching Al into yet another offensive battle against both the Crimson Lotus Alchemist and the Eldest Sin. The battle does not favor Alphonse, that is, until Heinkel hands him a Philosopher's Stone that Kimberly had dropped way back in the Northern Mines. While at first he's hesitant to use it, not wanting to take advantage of the souls trapped within the stone, Heinkel makes him realize there is no saving the lives within the stone, but if Al is able to defeat their enemy here, he could save the lives of many. He takes this stone and leads the attack against the pair, distracting them and allowing Heinkel to get behind and crush Kimberly's windpipe, leaving him near death. They retreat into Central, leaving Pride standing over Kimberly's dying body. He laments that he wanted to see the changing of this world Father's plan would bring. Pride offers to consume his body and allow him to watch from within. He takes this offer, and the war criminal breathes his last breaths as a human being. The Armstrong siblings are wrapped in their own battle. Soldiers continue to try and arrest Oliver, but each time they're quickly killed by the quickest and thickest homunculus of Sloth. Both siblings are pushed against the wall, terribly injured, but find it in themselves and the Armstrong name to outmatch the monster. Alex continues his onslaught until reinforcements arrive, Izumi and her husband making an appearance, and the four of them beat down Sloth until his stone holds no remaining life force. As he dissipates from the world, he speaks of how much a bother death is, how much a bother living was. With Sloth out of the picture, the only job remaining for them is to force surrender of the remaining outholders to the coup, and destroy the lesser homunculi that have escaped the basement. Mustang has found Ed's position and backs him up in containing the lesser homunculi threat, but surprisingly, one of the sins makes the return. Envy has escaped May's jar within the sewers, having convinced her to return to Amestris to obtain a true Philosopher's Stone. He feasts on the souls of the immortal white zombies, gaining strength to face the very people he's envious of. He riles up the Flame Alchemist by admitting to the murder of Hughes, grinning as he reminisces of shooting him while he stood there frozen, seeing his wife staring back at him with a gun. Mustang cannot contain the anger and hatred within him, quickly launching wave after wave of flame at the homunculus. Envy had seriously overestimated what strength he had regained. He's annihilated each time he reforms his body, until once more he returns to his sorry state as a mere slug. Mustang crushes him under his boot, preparing to burn him alive one last time. But Riza, Ed, and Scar stop him. His face carries the weight of hatred that Scar all too personally knows. It's not befitting of the man who wishes to become Führer. Words from his friends force Mustang to realize what he's become. He backs off. This pity pisses off Envy more. He tries to use the history of everyone in this room to create animosity, speaking of Scar's misdeeds, of Mustang's built-up hate, but no one listens to what he says. Looking around at their faces, he sees they all look back at him as a sad, jealous creature, envious of humanity's capabilities. He refuses to be looked at in such a light, pulling his cord from his chest, choosing suicide over pity.
感動の再会なのにむっつりか。
The pair of this tale began with reunite for the first time in centuries. Van laughs at the fact the dwarf who used to scoff at the idea of family has ironically chosen to call himself father and lead his own children of desires. He wonders why father decided to abandon the 7 desires that make one human, noting the man before him is nothing more than an emotionless creature, unbefitting of seizing the title of God. This father is nothing like the dreamer who lived in the flask, whose only wish was to walk among humans. He assumes loneliness had gotten to the dwarf and made him decide to renounce attachment, leading him to pursue greater knowledge and power as spite for his emotions. Father denies these feelings, speaking that he has no interest in human life nor attachment to it. The dialogue turns quickly to combat as the battle between lost friends begin. The Fuhrer advances alone straight through the front gates of his castle. No human nor tank can hold back his wrath. He quickly advances to the main gate, Buccaneer sacrificing life and limb to keep the man at bay. Alone he is no match for the homunculus, but with the help of greed, he may just stand a chance. Their battle grows in length, Fu assisting his lord by laying down his life against the sin, but his bomb vest is defused with one flick of a sword, slashing the fuses and his stomach. Buccaneer takes advantage of Fu's sacrifice, plunging his sword through the old man, an attack Wrath's all-seeing eye cannot see. Bradley is dealt a fatal blow. Ling, not wasting the men's sacrifice, continues the assault. Wrath attempts to take both of them to the grave, blasting through the side wall. The two hang over the waters of the moat, Lan Fan holding onto Ling's arm, Bradley clutching to Ling's. A Briggs soldier points his gun over the edge, firing at Wrath as he throws his sword towards the soldier. The final attack he'll deliver before sinking into the waters. Climbing back up the wall, Ling is faced with the reality of Fu's sacrifice. There is no alchemy, no stone that can save his servant. He has already passed to the beyond. Ling's left in grief as Buccaneer 2 is moments from death as well. The captain requests Ling uses his power to save the lives of their soldiers who are dangerously low on supplies, as the pro-Bradley soldiers are moments from breaking their lines of defense. Ling uses what time and power remains to destroy the advancement before the eclipse begins as the nationwide transmutation circle quakes with anticipation and Father summons those to be sacrifices to his domain. Despite the entire purpose of the homunculi to ensure this day goes smoothly, they have failed at this simple job. Father is left with only 4 sacrifices at this pivotal moment. Pride and Wrath, who both barely hold on to life, hastily enter the sanctum that Scar, Mustang, and company are currently fighting in. They force Mustang to perform human transmutation, Pride sacrificing a great amount of his stone in the process, and Roy enters through the gate, and to Truth, who as a toll takes his eyesight. Roy wakes up with the other sacrifices in front of Father, as the moon covers the sun and the apocalypse begins. Based on the Gaia hypothesis, the Earth and all the living organisms that cover its body are but one singular organism, all tied together through one system, making up one being. Father believes this entity to hold an even greater knowledge than any one human being can imagine, and as the total eclipse begins, he will open Gaia's gate and make contact with the god of the Gate of Truth. The 5 sacrifices are pinned to the ground around Father. May and Scar are held back by the remaining homunculi from intervening as the entire area becomes filled with a black film, coating the land as the transmutation circle around Amestris activates. A large gate opens in the sky as Father climbs from its recesses, calling to the sun and moon to open their own. On command, the gates of heaven open, revealing the eye of God. Its tendrils race from the door towards Father, human beings collapsing in the streets of Amestris, the promised day coming to pass. Humanity has lost, or so we thought. Father thought he had won. He did not for a moment believe that Hohenheim was capable of a counter-plan. With the assistance of the souls he had held within his stone, which is deposited over the earth in 5 distinct locations to activate as a counter-transmutation, Father is stripped of the 50 million Amestris souls he had just consumed. These souls rush back to their bodies across the land, severely weakening Father, and at the level he is at now, there is no way he can hold God within his vessel. His very being begins to crack, lashing out at the sacrifices in front of him as God attempts to leave him. May creates a shield to disperse most of the energy as the Elric family absorbs the front of the blast. Above them, Scar finishes off Wrath, dragging himself to the circle that still lays on the floor. He uses the fruits of his brother's research to send a nullifier of Father's bottlenecking of the Amestris alchemist's powers. With it gone, he can no longer cut off the Elric Brothers' abilities. Enraged by this, he departs to the surface where he'll consume souls one by one in an attempt to keep God within his being. But there are those who will do anything to stop the false deity. Ed stays behind to defeat Pride before joining the others, quickly making work of the weakened Sin. He reaches the surface, but the battle against a god seems futile in words alone. Father's abilities are unmatched. Common weapons of war bounce off as if an invisible shield surrounds his body. But this does not waver the spirits of humanity. The false god must die. Those who can still stand launch volley after volley at Father. An inferno cakes his body before Greed rushes through the smoke in an attempt to absorb some of his strength. Izumi and Ed lay down support for the only remaining homunculi, which is when Father begins to crack. He uses his arm to block a kick. His alchemy begins to weaken. He truly can't hold back the god he consumed. If he can bleed, then he can die. Father screams in agony, releasing a horde of energy, knocking back all combatants. As the dust settles, he calls out in desperation for a philosopher's stone. His eyes dart for a worthy soul, falling upon the Fullmetal Alchemist. Pinned to a wall by rebar with no way of escaping, Ed can only watch as the man marches towards him. In a last-ditch effort, Al asks May to assist him in destroying his blood rune. If his soul were to return to his rightful body, then Ed's sacrifice of his arm for his soul would be fulfilled, and his arm would return. Al destroys the rune that keeps him grounded to the physical plane, returning to the gate where his body has waited for him, as Edward's arm returns. His sacrifice would not be in vain. Ed instantly launches into a series of blows against Father. On the ropes, he once more has seizures as power escapes him and God attempts to take his leave. But he still has enough energy to prevent the deity's departure. He rushes for Greed, attempting to absorb him and all his souls. Internally, Ling and Greed have a bickerman as Greed prepares to sacrifice himself for his retainer and friend. But Ling argues they should stay together. Knowing he won't be able to fight Father's absorption, Greed tells Ling to live on for the both of them as Emperor of Xing. This is where he bows out. The self-serving desire commits the most selfless sacrifice, causing havoc within Father, changing the structure of their body to that of the weakest form of carbon, giving Ed an opening to blow a hole straight through Father's stomach. More souls escaped his weakened form. It seems he's reached his end. God's tendrils escape his wound. The dwarf is slowly crushed by its own body, screaming out for a savior, damned to the origin of its creation. The dwarf is met by the entity it tried to pose as. Truth greets the dwarf back to its origins. It chastises him for his failure to evolve as a creature, believing that he had surpassed humans by casting away his 7 desires, but by doing so failed to see the purpose in these desires. Instead, he became conceited and boastful, believing he was above other forms of life, and as so he believed he could surpass the all-knowing being of the universe, but that would be ignoring what truth is. The truth of the matter is that the dwarf is lesser than humans. He spit at them, yet he needed them in pursuit of power. He was arrogant and foolish, and for the crime of acting outside of his limits, of failing to recognize his place in the greater world. His judgment is delivered as he returns to the gate, the same place that he had been picked out from by a human. The dwarf screams in defiance, attempting to escape, but there is nowhere for him to escape to. The same god he had attempted to consume now pulls him back to his rightful space. What could be sacrificed to bring back his brother from the gate? That is the question Ed is faced with, and the answer to that question has been in front of him this entire time. Returning to the gate realm to face Truth through a similar human transmutation circle he had used while trapped in gluttony, Ed appears before the deity yet again. Truth asks the boy what he's willing to sacrifice to bring back his brother. The alchemist already knows his answer. He offers up his gate, the symbol of an alchemist's knowledge of alchemy, the thing that allows one to perform such a mystical and great power. Surely the sacrifice of his ability of alchemy would be a sufficient exchange. Truth laughs. It seems Edward has finally become aware of life's true gifts. He had always believed that to solve anything, he must rely upon alchemy, that it was the answer to life, but the answers to his problems were not as deep and complicated as he made them to be. His meaning for life was the people in it. His gate for his brother is an exchange he can make without a second thought. As Ed's gate crumbles behind him, he returns to the world with his brother in arms, to a new dawn for humanity. Hohenheim has finally obtained the death he desired, leaving this world with a smile on his face as he speaks to his wife's grave of the children they raised turning out to be great men. In Central, Mustang prepares in his hospital room to solve the discrimination of Ishvalans, vowing to resolve this issue before becoming fewer. Dr. Marco enters the room showing Roy a philosopher's stone he wishes him to use to return his eyesight, so long as he vows to work towards creating a future for the Ishvalans, both as repayment for their sins in the Civil War and for the betterment of Amestris as a nation. He accepts the stone, but uses it on a friend who needs it more than him first. Scar is taken under the wing of Miles as he plans to assist in the rebuilding of the Ishval lands and its culture. The two set out to make a better tomorrow for their people. Ling, Lanfan, and Mei return to their home country. With the liquid of a philosopher's stone Greed had left him with, Ling plans to become the next emperor upon their return. He vows to Mei that he will ensure the survival of her family clan and make Xing a more harmonious country. Ed and Al finally return to resemble to the Rockbell residence where Rinri greets them both, rushing outside to embrace them, as their journey has reached its resolution. The two brothers have settled into the more peaceful times that followed the promised day, but adventure still calls their name. The Elrics part from each other to learn more about the world around them and pursue greater heights of knowledge. Al travels east towards Xing, hoping to reunite with Mei and learn alchemy history from her, while Ed travels into the unknown lands in the west to learn what alchemy they may know. At the train station, he says goodbye to Winry, and the two embrace each other, making a promise to marry when he returns. Ed watches the landscape pass by him as he reflects on the pain that he's gone through. He notes this pain is what makes lessons worth learning, for knowledge and experience is found through sacrifice. In sacrifice, they did experience. The Elric brothers have reached the end of one journey, and they've set their sights on new horizons and new possibilities as their future grows brighter.